Okay, I think we've got everybody in. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's A Month of Service presentation of Special Education Rights and Understanding Section 504. My name is Nia Murray. I am the Programs Coordinator with Neighborhood Recovery Community Development Corporation, and we are one of the partners in the A Month of Service collaboration. Also included is the City of Houston's Department of Neighborhoods, and joining us, we have Ms. Rachel Gutierrez. Also included in the partnership, we have Lone Star Legal Aid, the Earl Carl Institute, the Houston Bar Association, Texas Legal Services Center, Houston Volunteer Lawyers, the Harris Central Appraisal District, and the Harris County Tax Assessor Collector's Office. And together we make up A Month of Service. But on behalf of our partner with the Houston Bar Association, we have facilitating and moderating our program today, Spectrum Links, and we have joining us Ms. Wendy Dawson. We also have presenting today Disability Rights Texas, Family to Family Network, and Behavior Savvy Solutions that's going to be presenting the information to you guys about special education rights and understanding. But just to kind of give you a brief little background about A Month of Service, it's a collaboration of all of these organizations. We come together on a monthly basis, offering a variety of workshops, resources, and information to the community relative to community empowerment, asset building, asset protection, and the maintaining of generational wealth. We know that there are a lot of underserved communities that are out there, a lot of people that don't know where to go for particular resources, for information. So collectively, we wanted to come together and create a larger impact and get more information out to the community that actually needs it. We know we actually started out doing these presentations in person. But of course, due to COVID, we've had to adjust and adapt and go to the virtual platform, which has actually been a benefit to us because it has allowed us the opportunity to reach people outside of the city, surrounding counties, and also throughout the state of Texas. So it's been great for us. The presentations have evolved over the last several years to include the information that you guys all contact us about to say, hey, you need more information or whatever's going on or whatever's relevant for that moment. So continue to reach out to us and let us know what it is that you guys actually need and what you are interested in. So for today, we have information about special education rights. Parenting is not easy by any means for anybody. And so when you're trying to maneuver through different systems, through different obstacles, and you just don't know, then you just don't know. So we want people to be able to have a platform or have an opportunity to reach out and receive whatever services that are available to them when they need it. So we thank you guys for joining us this afternoon. We are going to move into introductions and get right into our presentation. This is an opportunity, if you like, to ask whatever questions that it is that you need of the professionals that we have that are available for this topic for today. Please feel free to type your question into the chat. They'll try to answer questions as they go along, but otherwise the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you'd like, please feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself at the end so that you can ask questions directly if you're not comfortable with typing your question into the chat. We also want you to be aware that we are recording the session as well as broadcasting live on our social media platform on Facebook so that everyone can actually participate if they're not familiar with Zoom. So you do have the opportunity also on Facebook to put your question into the comment section, and I'll make sure that your question is read aloud at the end there as well. Also, please keep in mind that we want to try to protect your privacy as much as we possibly can. So we ask that you try to keep your questions to be general and not give any specific detailed personal information getting out there for everyone to actually have access to. So do keep that in mind. But again, this is your opportunity to ask whatever question that it is that you do have. However, we do encourage you to please reach out to any of these presenters that we have that are here today if you feel that you need more additional detailed services that's more specific to your particular situation. Also, note that information that is presented here today is for educational purposes only. It is not to be considered legal advice. However, if you do find yourselves in need of any civil legal assistance, please feel free, and we encourage you to reach out to our legal service partners that are part of the A Month of Service collaboration as well. With that being said, we are going to move right along and introduce this wonderful panel that we have that have volunteered their time for today to provide this information to you. So we are going to get started. So Ms. Rachel, let's go ahead and have you get started, and then Wendy will have you get started.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Gutierrez. I am a Community Outreach Coordinator for the Department of Neighborhoods Office of Neighborhood Engagement on behalf of Mayor Whitmire and our Interim Director, Sims. We welcome you to the workshop for today. Thank you to our partners and our special guests for this presentation. As Nia mentioned previously, we are here for you in the workshops that are created for your education. We encourage that if you have suggestions, feel free to reach out to myself or to Nia to provide those suggestions on what workshops or what topics of interest you are looking forward to receiving that perhaps we currently do not have. We welcome all suggestions, and hopefully we can make that happen for you guys. But if there's anything else that the Department of Neighborhoods can do to assist you in areas of need, please feel free to reach out to us. I will put my contact information into the chat so that you can reach out to me directly. But once again, we thank you for attending this afternoon, and please spread the word to those in your community, your places of worship, the grocery store, wherever you may meet someone, because I'm pretty sure something that we have will be a benefit of somebody that you know. So thank you.
Okay, Miss Wendy, why don't you go right ahead?
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Nia. I'm Wendy Dawson. I am basically a business owner. I'm the stepmother to a young man on the autism spectrum. I have been working in this field for about 20 years now, and I'm super happy to have the opportunity to moderate this panel today because these fine subject matter experts are friends of mine, and I've worked with them for a long time, and I'm happy actually to see a lot of friendly faces here in the waiting room. So, you know, when the Amos group came and asked, you know, would I be willing to moderate this and what the topic was, I immediately said yes, because there probably are a few topics that are more important to families now, needing information on how to navigate their rights and navigate through the school system. So I'm not going to take up any more time. Let's go ahead and introduce our panelists so you know exactly who you're talking to and who is giving you this information. I'm going to go through the slides, and we have lots of information to share. So in alphabetical order, let's go with Mr. Alex Zabak from Disability Rights.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Alex Zabak. I'm a graduate of South Texas College of Law, Houston, and I am a special education attorney with Disability Rights Texas.
He's going to be leading off the presentation. Okay, Mary Jane Williams.
Hi, I'm Mary Jane Williams. Thanks for having me today. I am with Family to Family Network. We're a parent organization here in Houston that helps families understand all the systems that you're involved in when your child has a disability diagnosis. I'm also the parent of 2 adult children with disabilities, and I'm looking forward to sharing information today.
Thank you, Mary Jane. And Dr. Stephanie Rodriguez.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm also excited to be here today. I currently provide services to parents and educators in the form of special education advocacy. I do consultation in school districts, working with different special education programs specific to behavioral supports for students who have autism, as well as emotional disabilities and intellectual disabilities. And I also provide training and professional development in that realm as well. And then as of recently, I've been doing some life coaching with autistic individuals, and that's been really fun and exciting. So I'm happy to share as much knowledge as I can with you today. Thank you.
All righty.
Thank you so much. As you can see, you've got the big guns out today. So, Ms. Nia, if you would advance our slides, please, we are going to get straight into the heart of this presentation. And what we really tried to do today is kind of start with the wider idea, we're going to give you a little background about the framework covering these issues, and then we're going to get into some more specific topics and, more important, strategies. So today is not only going to be information, but really empowering you to take this information back and be able to use it for the good of your families. So Alex, as our attorney on the panel today, would you start us off kind of with the main idea of how IDEA came about, what it is, 504s, etc. Put this into context for us, please.
Sure. So there are two acts of Congress that shape special education law as we know it today. The first is the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and then the second is the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. And so that translates to IDEA, you'll hear that phrase a lot, or Section 504, which is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And so that is the section that is specific to education in, federally, but then also Texas. These are federal laws that our U.S. Congress has put into place. And so every state is also required to follow those, but then states also have specific rules as well. For instance, the IDEA is administered by your state education agency. So for Texas, it's the TEA, the Texas Education Agency. And that is the agency that you can do all of your process through, as well as the watchdogs over the schools. So a little bit about what 504 is. That focuses mostly on accommodations. And you'll see that a lot if a student is on a 504 plan, or what they call that is a student in general education placement, but they are on a 504 plan that gives them their reasonable accommodations to allow that student to excel still in a general education placement, but with the special accommodations. A different example would be a student who falls under the IDEA, in which case they are put on an individualized education plan, or an IEP. We'll hear that phrase a lot today. And that gives them a more specialized or tailored educational plan. So we're moving out of accommodations, but in the specific general education placement, and more to specializing the actual education itself and how it is taught.
Perfect. Let's move on. Dr. Stephanie, can you take our bullet point number 2 here and continue on Alex's thoughts there about what are the differences between IDEA and Section 504, please?
Sure. I think one of the biggest differences here is the specialized instruction component. Students who are receiving special education, they also receive accommodations and modifications, but they also have a need for specialized instruction, and that's through a decision that's made at the beginning to see when they're going through the eligibility process. And so with the 504, Section 504 piece, that piece is not there. However, students do have accommodations to access the general education curriculum, if you will. And they just have certain accommodations or modifications that they may need in order to access it at the same rate as their non-disabled peers.
Mary Jane, if you'll come off mute for us, don't forget to unmute. Thank you. And then wrap this slide for us in like, what are the takeaways, and when would parents seek which kind of component, or how do parents know what they need under these big, broad laws that can be very complicated and overwhelming?
I think the big difference is something that Stephanie just mentioned. It's under eligibility, and the fact that once you go through that whole initial evaluation process, that's where you're going to determine whether a child is eligible for an IEP or whether they may just need accommodations. For some students, we may know already that the school may say, oh, we need to look at providing some more intensive accommodations for this child, and so we're gonna develop a Section 504 plan. one thing I will note for parents is that you have more rights and responsibilities under an IEP. But under Section 504, your rights and responsibilities are very limited. And so it really falls then on the student to follow up on the accommodations and the teachers to provide them. And so that's why you'll often hear a lot of times, well, they didn't ask for that accommodation. And so it's really important as a parent to remind and build the self-advocacy skills of your students if they have a 504 plan, and to discuss it with them so that they can move forward. But as a parent, you don't have as many rights under a Section 504 accommodation plan versus what you would have under an IEP.
We're going to come back to what you just said there about the students being able to advocate for themselves. That's a really big point, and that's further down in the presentation here. Okay, well, I know that seems really overwhelming at this point for many of you if you've never heard all these acronyms or these ideas, but hopefully we've got 6 or 7 more slides and a really good chart coming up. So let's keep going. And as Nia said, there will be a chance at the end for questions. We will actually do our best to answer your questions. And if you have a burning question, put it in the chat room there and we'll do our best to address it as we go. Okay, Ms. Nia, let's go to our second slide, please. Here we're going to start talking about the best practices in developing and implementing the plan that you need for your child. And this is really important because what we found is a lot of parents don't even know what they are entitled to. They don't even know what they can ask for. They don't know what is mandated for them to have. And a lot of times, if you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it. So, as I said, we're going to start narrowing down this line of thinking. So, Dr. Stephanie, we're going to let you kick off this bullet here. Talk to us a little bit about the 504 plans. What's in them, how they're created, the IEP plans. We've got here in the bullets that they have to be reviewed and updated annually. Address a little bit why that is so important and how parents can get their goals in these documents, please.
Okay, sure. So on here, let's assume that, your student or your child has met either the eligibility criteria for an IEP plan. We can start there. So if they're on an IEP plan, their plan is developed annually. And when I say annually, it depends on the calendar date, depends on when that actual IEP plan is developed. So it's really important for parents to note that, because sometimes even at the start of a school year, they might say, well, I haven't had an IEP meeting yet, because it's possible that annual IEP is still in progress. So that would be the first thing to make sure to understand, that those dates are not like calendar dates per se. They're not even just like following the school calendar. It's really dependent on that child's annual date. Now, what will happen is in a situation where things are going great and your child's meeting, working towards their goals and there's really no issue, you're going to meet annually to review how they did on the goals that they had set forth in the prior meeting that was done. And then also, if they're making progress and they've mastered goals, then they're going to move on to the next level and they're going to try to develop some other goals depending on their present levels of academic and functional performance. And the way they find that information out is going to be the data that's collected throughout the school year. So this is like how they do with their assignments, how are they doing with on their tests or assessments, how are they doing with the assignments related to actual IEP goals. So with that being said, you're going to have that annual checkpoint. And throughout the year, you will have progress report time. So just depending on your school district, or if your child's in elementary school, which in Texas is usually like, I think it's every 6 weeks. And then at the secondary levels, every 9 weeks. So just make sure to double check with your particular school to see how are your child's case manager, how often are progress reports sent out, when can I expect those? With a 504 plan, what I have found as having been a 504 coordinator, having been a 504 parent, when they're younger, when your child is younger, they typically have these more annually. And because, as it was mentioned prior, those 504 is not as rigid, if you will, as special education plans. But the school will typically check in every year for the same reason. How are they doing with these accommodations? Are they using them? Because if they're not using them, the school's gonna 9 out of 10 times push to get rid of the accommodation, because it falls on the general ed teacher to make sure they're implemented. So if the child's not using them, they're gonna probably push to get rid of them. What I have noticed is as the students level up into the secondary years, especially to high school, sometimes they're not having them annually. So it's really important as a parent, if you want those meetings to be held, to make sure that you're communicating with your 504 coordinator and saying, hey, we haven't had a meeting since junior high. My child's now in high school. I know things are different. I need a meeting. So overall, both plans are going to happen annually, especially with the IEP plan. And I won't continue to talk more about it, but I will say just remember, in each plan, none of these are set in stone, which means if there's changes or things are going on, you can always call for an IEP meeting, even if it's to just review current progress.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to ask Mary Jane to follow up on this. And I saw there was a question, where are the bullets? So if you're looking on the slides, there are actually little slash marks in there rather than the little circle bullets. But Mary Jane, we're asking you to follow up on that. Talk to us about the importance of having these progress reports, these 504s and IEP plans be collaborative. And Stephanie mentioned a lot about the IEP coordinators. Can you talk to us about the teams that are involved in this, and where do parents go to find out who they're supposed to contact and if they have questions? Because we've all done this for so long. I want to make sure that we're not forgetting just those intuitive questions of, okay, I'm about to enter this IEP or 504 world. Where do I even start on that? So talk to us a little bit about developing that collaborative relationship, please.
You know, Wendy, that is so important for families and for educators to work together on these plans, whether it's a 504 or an IEP. I know that it was very important for me to be able to discuss with the educators involved as my kids had IEPs, really about what was needed, talk about the progress, and then we could move forward and make plans for the next year. But for a parent that may not know where to start out, your best bet is to ask the teacher, your general ed teacher, and then move forward in the sort of chain of command. Really always start out with that general educator to ask questions instead of stepping on toes and making some assumptions. And for individuals that think that their child might need an IEP, you're going to have to make a written request for it. There's not going to be, if you talk to the teacher, they may say, yes, you probably do need that, but they're not going to move forward with it unless you do something in writing and give that letter requesting that initial evaluation to the principal of your school, and then that should be able to start the process happening for your child to get that IEP. But you know, it's really important for parents to work with school and work with your child so that you all are on the same page, and that way everyone knows what's happening. Look at those progress reports. Don't wait till the end of the year to look at them. You should be paying attention every 6 or 9 weeks, like Stephanie talked about, and making sure that your child is making some progress. I used to collect homework samples or work samples from my son and just try to match it up to make sure that what they were really talking about and reporting on progress really matched up with what they were reporting, because sometimes it doesn't. And so I want parents to be aware of that. Make sure you're collecting that work and looking at what they're doing. And I worked with my son at home a lot just because I knew that I had to do extra stuff for him. And it helped me understand what the teachers were going through, and we really could have a collaborative approach in developing that IEP. The 504 plan, it is a collaborative approach, but as I stated, as a parent, you don't have as many rights. So. And you're probably going to ask Alex about communication, so I'm not going to go any further.
Sounds good. Can you just touch on these reports? We're talking about progress reports, but I know, and maybe this is switching subjects, but I used to get ARD reports as well. Is there any more information under these plans that will be sent home other than those regular 6 weeks progress reports?
I think now you can actually go online, most families can, and see what the grade is based on. It may or may not relate to IEP goals. I mean, that's something that you should be working out in your IEP meeting. But being able to look at what those grades are and what the activities were and what curriculum that might have been related to is important also to look at, besides the IEP progress reports. For families that have a 504 plan, you're not going to get a progress report necessarily on the 504 accommodations. You're just going to get grades in the system. And it's important to keep up with that as a parent, so you know where your child may be doing well or not, or maybe the reason they're not doing well is the accommodations aren't being followed. If you wait till the end of the year to follow up, your child's going to lose out. So it's really important to go into that, the online data that teachers have to put into the system to make sure that you're, that's your progress right there, and you'll be able to tell and be able to talk with your son or daughter about whether those accommodations are being provided.
No, I love that. That's great. Thank you. So 2 important points I just think are worth highlighting there is, one, all this information's online now. Like when my son was growing up, we didn't have those online things to check. And also something that you mentioned is that, and what Stephanie mentioned too, is it's not only what's in those reports, it could be other things that are going on. What are the classroom dynamics? What are the other kid dynamics? And if you're looking at all of this data, not just myopically in that IEP, there's a lot that parents can learn about that as well. Thank you, Mary Jane. Great points. Okay, Alex, now the tough questions for you. So we've heard about the collaborative reports and the information that's supposed to be there. And both Dr. Stephanie and Mary Jane have mentioned the fact that you have to make written requests and the importance of documentation. So can you kind of emphasize the importance of the accommodations and the supports that are available, but how important it is for parents to go about this in the right way and to document things as they go along, or their questions or their requests. And then we had a question in the chat room is, why would someone be denied a SPED eval or a special education evaluation? So documentation, and then what happens if you don't get or you're not getting what you need, please.
Yeah, so to that last point about why a student may be denied, there are a few different reasons for it. If an evaluation was done, that is an evaluation done by what's called the ARD committee, or the admission review and dismissal committee, and that is also known as like the IEP committee. They are made up of school psychologists, your principal, and special education coordinators at the school, as well as the parent. I think that's an important point that oftentimes we forget about, but the parent is also a part of the committee and can make decisions. But the school would then do an evaluation of the student. We talked a little bit earlier about eligibility. So in Texas, there are 9, I believe, eligibilities. Federally, there are 13, but Texas consolidates a few of them. And those eligibilities are typically the disability that your student has. And so if you fall under any of those eligibilities, that is what makes you eligible for those special education resources. So if a student were to be evaluated and then found that they do not meet an eligibility, that would be a reason why. We see this oftentimes with students with autism, for instance, where they may have a community diagnosis. A doctor outside of the school may diagnose a child with autism. However, that student may not be expressing a school-based need for special education services due to their disability of autism. And so that is that 2 parts. You may have the community diagnosis, but it's not showing up in a different situation within the school. And so the school will decide not to give those special education services. Those always can be appealed. However, if a school does not give you the evaluation at all, that leads back into Wendy's first question of documentation. In that situation, under the IDEA, a parent is required to ask in writing for an evaluation. And so it needs to be a written request. That can be in an email, that could be a Skyward message, that could be anything, but it does need to be in writing. And that is so the parent can prove it, and so a judge can review that. So a hearings officer could review that. In a situation where a student is presenting a need for a specialized plan, the school also has an obligation under the IDEA to what's something called child find. And so oftentimes with Disability Rights Texas, we're a legal aid clinic, but a lot of our cases are filing cases against the school under the TEA for child find violations, that even though a parent may not have given in writing, the school should have known and should have done the obligation of what they're supposed to, which is recommend that this student have a specialized plan. That becomes a lot harder because now you're putting the school on the back foot, and so they have to defend themselves. We work with some great school attorneys who are pretty resolution oriented. We're like, oh, okay, this student slipped through the cracks. We're happy to we'll handle this. We'll evaluate them. Oftentimes that's not the case, and so once you bring the lawyers, it gets a little bit more difficult. So it's important that you save those emails, keep a folder on Google or something, off to the side, but also, save those to a PDF in case you need to have that. And I recommend, print out everything and keep it in a paper folder as well. Just anything they give you, keep that in a folder and have that be, your parent notebook. And develop all of the paperwork that you have. So that way too, if you do need, services from a private attorney or with disability rights, you can hand us that, and then we can get caught up on your child's case. And so it saves yourself the trouble of having to prove he said, she said down the line, but it also, indicates that, on October 1st, I requested a evaluation, and 15 days went by, you didn't acknowledge it, 45 days went by, and you didn't give me an evaluation.
Alex, real quick, there's a good question in the chat box. What if your child is transitioning to private school? The question is, can we call for an IEP meeting or an assessment from the school district? Can you just briefly address rights and regs, public and private, and what somebody might be able to take with them or lose if you transition to private school?
So the IDEA covers all public schools because the public school is receiving public funding. And so something that we mentioned earlier, the IDEA specifically allows for what's called FAPE, or free and appropriate public education. So that keyword is public. Now we start to get into a little bit of constitutional law. Private schools, they're not considered state actors. They're not the government acting. So when they do anything that is not within, if you have discrimination against, a protected class, which people with disabilities are, you have due process rights. So you might hear us say that there's a due process trial that you have under the TEA. Private schools do not have that because they are not directly regulated by the government through the IDEA. However, I would recommend that you still try to work with the school. A lot of private schools still have, programs and things like that for people with disabilities. So it's not like you're completely lost without recourse. But that is the one downside of a private placement. The weird instance is when you start having charter schools, which are private, but receive public funding. And so they, by contract, do act as a public school. And so they do fall under the IDEA. But by design, they were set up not within the same structure. And so they may not have the same resources for your student. So I would recommend to reach out to the school. You asked specifically about transitioning as well. If you transition from one public school to another, you would have a transition ARD meeting if you're already on an IEP. And so one school would basically be telling the other, here's what we've got, here's what we're doing. The other school may say, we want to reevaluate him just with our guys so we know what's going on. which I always recommend. I think that's helpful. But when you're going from public to private, you do lose those protections under the IDEA. And we mentioned earlier why the IDEA has more protections than Section 504. The IDEA came out, it was originally in 1975, it had a different name. And then in 1990, it was renamed. And that was the same year that Congress passed the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so that year, Congress did have a special focus on people with disabilities through a lot of rich history of legislative action and activism. But the IDEA specifically focuses on that free and appropriate public education. And so that's why it gives more protections as opposed to Section 504, which was just giving accommodations.
Awesome. Thank you. So I think it's a really important differentiator because sometimes private schools are a better placement for children. And let me just mention here that there are several specialty private schools around Houston that focus on different and special needs, and those might be beneficial for your child. As we go on today, though, we're going to focus on the public schools because that's what the topic of this was. But I do think it is important to address that. And I know Mary Jane, and there are several other people we can put you into contact. If anybody here is interested in the Special Schools Coalition in Houston, we'll be happy to make that information available at the end of the chat. So
can I just answer one thing about the denied the special ed evaluation? I just want you to remember that Alex answered a lot of the questions, but sometimes you also have to look at the fact that an IEP is developed because a child needs specialized instruction in some area. And sometimes our kids really just need accommodations. They don't need any specialized instruction. And that's just an important difference between that and a 504 plan. And Stephanie mentioned that at the beginning too.
Thank you. Okay, Miss Nia, if you could move to our next slide. Stephanie, we're gonna actually let you kind of explain. I don't think we don't really have time to talk through this whole chart, but thank you for offering this from the school psychologist files. It's a really great chart, and take it away, help us understand what this chart shows here. And feel free to take pictures of this, or we will be able to send this with the recording and after the presentation as well.
I'll include it with the recording. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this was really helpful, especially as an educator. I had a lot of teachers that I worked with, and they just were curious what was the difference, especially because they would have students in their classroom sometimes that were either on an IEP and other students that were on a 504 plan, sometimes in the same class period. So really the difference here, as you notice, is the type of law, as Alex has mentioned to us, and I've also learned some things from Alex today. Thank you, Alex. Because it's really good to get, even though, having been in the field for so long, there's so many things that you just learn along the way. And so it's really helpful to have these touch points and just kind of learn more. And also because it trickles down to the supports and services you can provide to your child. So really, as we mentioned, on the left side, you see the IEP plan. On the right, you see the 504 side, both under different laws. The departments that oversee both are different, as was mentioned, I think, also a while ago, but the Department of Education oversees the IEP side, and the Office of Civil Rights is for the 504 plan, and I'll mention why in a moment. The requirements, so again, it just depends on the child. So I think the question also asks, what's the difference, or how do I know if my child is better off with a 504 and IEP plan? It will depend on this. So while that a student may have a disability, it really is going to depend on if they meet a certain criteria under IDEA. Also, it needs to, for an IEP plan, it needs to significantly impact the educational performance. And I think Alex had mentioned that earlier, which I see a lot too. Children that have autism or autistic individuals may have that diagnosis outside of school, and then you go before an art committee and they're like, they don't have an educational need. So that's another key component. They have to have that educational need. And sometimes our autistic kiddos do have that requirement. They need that specialized instruction. They need to be in a resource setting, a smaller program to meet the educational need, as well as sometimes their behavioral needs. And some of our kids don't need that. They might just need a few accommodations, which is when a 504 plan would be more appropriate. And then the third piece for the IEP plan is requiring specialized services. So if the student is eligible for like speech services, they might need occupational therapy, visual supports, anything within a related service realm, that could be provided through an IEP plan. On the 504 side, you don't have the related services necessarily, but I'm sorry, sometimes they do have related services like speech. I think we've had before, or correct me, I might be wrong on that one. I don't know, Alex, you might need to double check me on that. But I have seen students have related services. Once we had kid needed transportation help due to seizures, and so we were able to support that through a 504 plan. And then the big one thing I do want to mention before we leave this slide is the important thing to note is with an IEP plan, it's for K through 12 specific. So an IEP plan is not something that will necessarily follow the student when they graduate from high school. A 504 plan can follow a student and through school or work type settings, as well as in college. Under both, your child will definitely need to communicate with the eligibility or every college is different. Every university has like a disabilities or like an accommodation department. They would want to bring their last IEP and or 504 plan with them. So that way the school can see what accommodations they can support, whether it be like extra time on an assessment, or they might need a hard copy of class notes or something like that. Depending on what their plan is and what they've had in school, the college or university may be able to support some of those accommodations as well. So it's important to note, but if they were in special education, when they get to college and universities, they're not considered a special education student anymore. And then with discipline, 10 days is going to be a big thing. Without going too deep into that, I'll let Alex talk about that if it comes up. But definitely both students on both sides, with special education students and students with a 504 plan, they're both held to the student code of conduct. So however, if they're at a placement, this is really specific to an IEP kiddo, for more than 10 days, they would have to have a manifestation determination meeting, or MDR review meeting, to see if the conduct was a relationship to their eligibility. And so, yeah, that's just an overall summary on this chart.
Now, I appreciate that. I think these concepts are so big and keep saying overwhelming. So really to have a visual like that was very helpful. So thank you, Dr. Stephanie, for providing that. Okay, Ms. Nia, let's go to our next slide, and we're going to roll right into navigating the parental rights and advocacy here. So Alex, we're going to pass the virtual microphone back to you. Okay. And have you kind of continue this thought on what are the rights that parents are entitled to under these laws, and then differences between the states. I don't know how many states you're barred in, if you know, but maybe just broadly letting parents know that there are differences between the states and why it's important to understand if you're contemplating a move. Or I've actually known parents who have moved to other states because school systems provide different things. And then we had a question about if a public school cannot provide a service that has been determined that their child needs, at what point and how would a parent seek the public school system paying for those outside supports?
So touching on that last question about if a school can't provide services, oftentimes we will hear, oh, we don't have the resources for that, which I just get to sit there and smile and say, too bad. You are required by law to do this, figure it out. And so oftentimes, if they don't have the support in the school, say it's a smaller school district, then they will oftentimes, they're not required to, but we see this often, it's a trend, will then, it's cheaper for them, instead of building it within their school, the school district will then pay for outside services. And so that is something that they will do. And so that's how that instance comes up. But that is not a right, and that's not a requirement. So especially with a school, they are required to put a student in the least restrictive placement. And so the reasoning for that is because the whole point of the IDEA is to treat people with disabilities the same as any other person. And so, you know, while recognizing that a student may need more needs, we want, you know, society has put together legislation that's gonna limit that to where school doesn't put a student in a placement that is worse than what they need. And so the school is required to put the least restrictive means. So sometimes a private placement may not be the case. Going back to, you know, what the rights are under the specific laws. So an evaluation has to be done at least once every 3 years, but can be done more than that by agreement. And that is a full evaluation. And so sometimes we'll have, you know, what are called reads, which are smaller re-evaluations. But the ARD meeting, the committee meeting with the school, that needs to at least be done annually, but you can request one. A teacher or a parent can request one. And so, you know, the biggest thing is just have communication with your school, you know, find out who the special education coordinator is, or, you know, even through a teacher, if there is a teacher who's been working with your student, you know, they can help you navigate the school specifically, and ask for that information. And so it's important to keep up that dialogue. And then if you have a question, you can then call for an ARD meeting. And specifically at the ARD meeting, I don't, you know, stop me if we're going to get to this later. On this slide, I see we have the procedural safeguards and the guide to the ARD process. So then we start getting into the alphabet soup of all the different regulatory agencies that you know affect the law. But procedural safeguards, you know, are in itself the safeguards of your procedure. You know, so you, under, you know, the Constitution, you are entitled to your due process. And so what that means is you get certain rights to have your day in court, right? You hear that expression a lot. While not necessarily going to court every time, there are processes set up in place for, you know, the government and through proxy the school to hear you out. And so in doing that, they can't infringe on those rights. So the school is required to give you, it's a really big packet. It's a boring read, but it's an important read. So I recommend reading through it at least once. And, you know, I still go back and read through it because it is a really good summary of just all of the rights and requirements that you have, but the requirements that the school has to follow as well. And so they're required to give you a notice of that. And it is important, you know, to any of our speakers who their native language is not English, the school is required to give it to you in your native language. This includes Braille and or a audio recording. So it's important to request that. And then they will give you the notice of the procedural safeguards. I recommend reading through it. If you have any questions, the thing that I always do, because, you know, when I'm working with clients, I'm working with them for a limited period of time. So if I go into an ARD meeting with them, I'm asking the committee to explain things to the parent, you know, and that's really what you want to be doing, because they're the ones that are required to give it to you. You know, we can give you all the advice you want, but if you can develop that relationship with the school itself, if I have a question, explain it to me. They are required to explain it to you. They can't just be doing stuff behind the scenes. And that's why I emphasize that the parent is also on the ARD committee. You know, you do have a say in it. It's not just them against you. I do try to go in with a collaborative mindset because I think it's a little bit easier than the combative. But at the same time, you know, you are your child's best advocate. And so it is important to go in and make sure that you are getting everything that you need.
I'm going to take that thought and run with it. And Stephanie, because we're longtime dear friends, I'm going to put you on the spot and say, give us an example of when you have seen good communication through this process, like a really good teamwork between the parent and the school officials. And then give us an example, if you can, of a bad one or when communication completely broke down, and kind of from your experience in the school districts and being an advocate, what do you think, what did that family who had a great experience, what did they do well, and what were tips you could learn from that? And then if that communication breaks down, just high level, what do you think those problems were in establishing the communication to get these rights that these kiddos need?
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot.
No, I think it's a good point. I think what I can say definitely it's a two-way street. I've been in the educator seat where the parents are like, "We are the educator, and you're supposed to do this and that," and then the educator feels like we're the parent, and you could have reached out too. And so, as Alex said, I mean, it can become very combative very quickly. So I think taking a proactive stance as the parent, and knowing like reaching out, this is what I would say, try to reach out in advance. Like once school starts, the first day of school is not the day to reach out and be like, "Hey, who's my child's case manager? What, are you guys follow my kid's plan?" Yeah. And there's a time and a place for everything. So I think first things first, find out who is over your child's plan. Do they have a case manager? If it's an elementary school, they may have a department chair. They may not. It might be the assistant principal who heavily oversees the special education programs and or the 504 side. So just contacting the school, whether it be through a simple phone call and just saying like, "Hey, who is over 504 plans?" Or, "Hey, my child's in special education, they're in 3rd grade. Who would be the contact for that?" A lot of times a simple phone call is going to get you a lot more answers, if anything, because then you can also follow up with, and I've done this myself, I need their email. The school, as Alex said, they're required to give you that information anyway. So if they don't give it to you over the phone, go to their website. A lot of that times that information is there. Use it. And if you're the parent and you haven't heard from your child's case manager, probably not that first day. Usually the first few days you will either receive like a letter or an email, like either a letter in your child's backpack or an email saying like, "Hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm your child's case manager," and they'll give you contact information. One thing I have noticed that is not effective, showing up at the school. So when parents, things will happen and
Mary Jane's nodding her head.
and they will show up at the school. And trust me, I've been the parent who has wanted to show up at the school, but I think in my defense, I've been on the educator side, I've been the admin, so I know it's a waste of time, and I'll tell you why. A lot of times it's on the school. I worked for a principal one time that said, if you go to a doctor's office, right, and demand to see the doctor doesn't just come out and answer your questions. You need to make an appointment. And so that was really she had more of a formal stance to it. And I think some parents hated it. Other parents liked it because it gave them an opportunity to be heard. It was not like "Hey, I'm just going to pop up and and that admin might say, "Hey, I've got duty and I've got 2 minutes to hear you." The admin's probably not going to be able to hear you or help you in that moment. So it's better to just reach out and say, "Hey, I have this concern. I would love an opportunity to meet with you." And as a parent, it's in your right to request a parent conference anyway. So utilize a lot of the other resources that you have before you go into these 504 meetings or these ARD meetings, because a lot of times in those meetings is the formalities. You're going through tons of paperwork, answering yes, no questions, putting things in action. So my advice would be on an effective side, reach out before these meetings, ask to sit down with the case manager or the 504 coordinator and say, "Hey, I know my child's meeting's coming up. I have some questions that I have before about that." And always ask for a draft copy of your IEP or the 504 plan beforehand. Those are going to be the proactive sides that you can do, and they're within your rights. And also requesting those paperwork with time. I can't remember how much time. Usually in a school, we would give it to parents anywhere from at minimum 3 days before the meeting. I think sometimes it can vary, like about a week would be best. You want the parent to be able to look through the plans and make an informed decision. As we've mentioned today, as a parent, your voice and the admin voice are the two that hold the most weight, especially in an IEP meeting, because if the parent disagrees, nothing moves forward. So with all that being said, the best thing to do to be effective is know who your stakeholders are at the school. Reach out on a proactive side. And if you haven't heard from them, instead of being combative, like, "Where have you been? I don't know," just approach it with more of a, "Hey, this is who I am, and I would like an opportunity to talk to you," and maybe provide them some best availability for you and what works best for you to communicate with you as well. So that would be my piece on communication for what works and what does not work.
That's great advice. Thank you. Mary Jane, we're going to let you follow up with that in seeking supports, because talk a little bit about these people are people too, right? This is their job and they are educators, and hopefully they're in education because they love to help our kids. And I know I've heard a lot of times people are scared, to reach out to these resources because they don't understand the system, or they don't know who their contacts are. So talk to us a little bit about, again, engaging resources that you think about at the school, and then smartly enough, being a family to family peer agency, some of the other supports and resources that are out there that we might not think of automatically.
So thanks, Wendy. Yes, there is sort of a hierarchy at school, and I think as parents, we really need to work with that teacher first and foremost. And Stephanie gave a lot of suggestions around that, being able to email and schedule a time. But Alex sort of talked about this too. You really need to start to understand your special education rights and understand the law. And I know that's, you're trying to figure out your child's disability and everything else, but at a minimum, open that procedural safeguards and review prior written notice. It's, they have to give you a copy once a year. I know too many parents just hand it back to you. Make sure it's the most current version and look at it. And prior written notice is just one of those important things about what you can do if they refuse to do something or they want to do something that you don't agree with. And there's just a lot of good information there, and that could be a whole training. But really, as a parent, I would reach out to advocacy groups and bounce ideas off them. Some groups have support that can review your IEPs, some do not. At Family to Family, we answer a lot of questions and realize how much parents don't understand the special education process. So we provide a lot of training around that. But your school districts offer training too. Take advantage of any training that they're offering. Too often I go to school district trainings and I would be the only parent showing up. And, so take advantage of it. And then Family to Family work with TEA on a website called Texas Project First that provides accurate and consistent information on the special education process. SpedTex is the statewide special education website for families. There's also TextSped support, which they took all the service center information and put it all into one spot where you can search for lots of good information. And then, every state has a parent training and information center, and Partners Resource Network here offers assistance to families as well. So that's another organization to reach out to. And there's the ARC of Houston and the ARC of Fort Bend. They all have advocates too that can help. And Stephanie is here to, I'm sure she'll bounce questions off you too, but it's really important as a parent to learn your rights and get some support from other agencies. I mean, I didn't know things right off the bat, and I had to get out and learn. And I learned from other parents, and I learned from the Partners Resource Network, and I attended Education Service Center trainings. There's just a wide variety of opportunity for you as a parent to learn your rights. And if you don't learn your rights now, when you have an opportunity to use them and practice them, your IEP is never going to be perfect that first time. Every year it's a work in progress, and every year we can come back and change it. And I know you hate to hear that, but I look back at my kids' IEPs from senior year and I can see all the errors in them now, but it doesn't matter. The educators really are there. They want to teach your kids, and they don't really want to fill out paperwork. None of us want to fill out paperwork. So nothing's ever going to be perfect.
Right. Perfect. I told everyone, hopefully everybody listening is now realizing what a breadth and depth of knowledge we have in this panel. So out of respect for everybody's time, we're going to keep moving on. I think this next slide, please, Nia. We continue talking about here is kind of this joint problem solving approach. And Mary Jane, this was your topic. Is there anything you want to...
I wasn't sure if I had this one or inclusion. So anyway.
Yeah, so you've got this one. Is there anything you want to add? Because you were kind of really talking there, maybe the importance of PTAs or your SPED counselors or anything else you'd like to add on the idea of joint problem solving and resources available?
Well, I'm going to say this, is that I want families to remember that teachers are teaching. And if you're interrupting them all the time with questions, they can't teach. So that whole communication system really has to be established up front at the beginning of the year, what works best. And then remember that teachers have families, so they don't want to spend all night replying to emails from every parent in their classroom. So make sure what you're emailing is really important, and it really has to be addressed immediately. And then I think parents, you need to get involved in other things on your campus. I was very much involved in PTA. They saw me coming and supporting other students at school. I worked in the copy center, so I got to see all the things that other kids were working on, so I could always make an extra worksheet. I worked in the library. That was sort of the center of, I worked at the welcome desk. You had to meet other people. There's just lots of opportunities to do that, but get out and volunteer with your school or your school district. Some school districts have special ed, parent advisory committees. Be the person that goes to those meetings and bring back information to other families. Follow them on social media. We didn't have as much online information as back when my kids were in school, but I mean, there's a lot of, the school districts do provide a lot of information online, and some school districts provide more training than others, but get out there and be involved. You probably don't just have one child, you probably have other children. So, give them some love too by supporting their non-disability related activities at school. And it just shows that you're caring about the whole school and not just your child. I know it's hard to do, especially if you're working, but figure out a way, go to one of those meetings in the evening and figure out a way that you might be able to support your school and help out. That's about collaboration.
I think that's wonderful. And I'm gonna go out of order here because that was such a great segue. So Stephanie, I'm gonna pass the mic to you and say, along those lines, let's talk about teaching those classrooms and teaching the other children about integrating with kids with learning differences and disabilities. Because Mary Jane, we have all talked about this so much about, what you're saying there is volunteering in the school, but it's also, Stephanie, talk a little bit about setting that example as not only, the mom who's coming in there to advocate for their child, but how do you set this example and show that you're there, loving and leading, and what good that can do to foster those positive partnerships and build trust and build respect? I'm flipping bullet points on you here.
Yeah. So on this part, I start with the school because really if we have any educators in the bunch here, a lot of that starts with y'all too. Because the thing is, I think sometimes parents, they're just, especially if they have special needs children, they're dealing with a lot. It's not just school stuff. They're tired. They're dealing with this stuff in the community. I was just listening to a mom today. She has a child that's has a lot of medical needs, and it's just she said she's going to an event and her biggest fear is he makes these loud noises, and how is the community going to respond to that? And she said she's just found that lately, when kids are staring or not and the parents aren't saying anything, she almost feels like she needs to defend her son and make a statement. And so I think that with that being said, we can just be as we educate ourselves more on inclusion, knowing how to make children feel that they're included in their school environments and in their communities. And I know a lot of the schools I worked at, when I seen it working effectively, was when they're coming to the assemblies, when they have certain nights and they're invited, when they're invited to be partners in some of the elective classes. You know, maybe they can't play football like some of the other students, but hey, they're there and they're assisting, whether it be with the players or they're helping, they're like the assistant coach there. I think, again, it really, if we have any educators in the room, please, it really starts with you providing opportunities for social skills instruction as well too, because I was just seeing a comment. We teach all of our autistic kiddos and individuals how to engage with the world, but we're really not teaching the world how to engage with our autistic community. And so I would just say the more knowledge you have, the better. Not being fearful, just being more inclusive and honestly, and just treating individuals like we would anyone else. They have likes and dislikes, and making opportunities for them, again, to just be included. And I think for teachers, in order for that, when students watch you do that with students that have disabilities, they will start to model that. And I have seen many mother hens, many big bros in schools who will hover around our students with disabilities, and they like protect them and they want to take care of them. And the only reason why that happens is because the school allows it to happen through like, I know schools that I work with have like, what is it called? Best Buddies. So if your school district acknowledges like a Best Buddies program, that's great, because you have students who are in secondary who maybe want to be as special educators, or maybe they're a sibling. And I used to have kiddos who their brother or sister had disabilities, and so they went on to be Best Buddies because they wanted to impact the lives of other students in a positive way. So I think with that being said, if you're an educator or a community program, opening up the door for that inclusivity, inviting more people that have non-disabilities to come in and be to engage and kind of network with people like us, with our group, I think is a good start. And just being open to our world.
Love it. That's why, yep, you can see why those positive approaches from an advocate go a long way. Okay, Alex, back to you. Sorry to detour a little bit there, but that was just too good to let go. So I want to give you the opportunity to touch on something here, and maybe you've seen from disability rights, because you guys are usually fighting for rights, right? You get pulled in when there's a problem. But Stephanie just said something that kind of rang to me, and she said, when schools allow good things to happen and schools support good things to happen, can you talk a little bit, take that fighting lawyer hat off, and talk about this communication and this advocacy and preventing and avoiding getting to a legal fight?
To avoid a legal fight, I mean, there's two sides of it, right? I mean, there's two sides of every coin, and oftentimes, I'll hear one story from my client, and then when I get discovery, it's a different story as well, and so then I have to find somewhere in the middle of, okay, what actually happened. I think a lot of it starts off with misunderstandings that spiral and become too large, and so I joke with my clients a lot. Sometimes the two letters after my name, the JD, kind of makes things harder than they need to be. Because when I get involved, that means the school's attorney has to get involved. And if the school's attorney gets involved, oh, well, then that's a big issue, right? That being said, we still want to encourage you to bring counsel, with you to these ARD meetings, because you are entitled to have either an attorney or an advocate with you. And they oftentimes the school will give you, some suggestions, recommended providers for either counsel or for an advocate. Oftentimes things can be avoided by just, like what Stephanie was saying, like schedule a meeting, sit down and be like, hey, can we talk about this? I'm not quite sure what's going on, or this gave me concern. But oftentimes there is going to be the time where it's like, okay, you were supposed to do that. And so the remedy that comes with a TEA violation, right? If the hearings officer finds that, yes, your rights were violated and you were supposed to be receiving special education services, that remedy is what's called compensatory education services. And so what that means is you are getting the services that you would have gotten if everything went as it was supposed to, just compensatorily, so adding on to it as an extra add-on. Sometimes we see that as like, extra services throughout the day. Sometimes that is a session after the school day, in which case oftentimes students are like, what, I have detention? Like, why do I have to go, for more class? So that is kind of the frustrating part is, even though we do advocate, the only remedy we are entitled to under the law is that compensatory education services. But because of that, you can just ask, hey, can you guys help me out here and maybe offer some comp ed? And schools will likely, offer that, because they know, and then you can skip that whole fight. And so that's something that we can do a lot of times. Like I mentioned, there are some attorneys that I work with the schools that we can handle a lot of things without TA involvement. Just say, hey, this student got, fell through the cracks. Can you do an expedited evaluation for them? Sure, no problem. And so I think that communication is important. To put the attorney hat back on, there is always a time and a place where you do have to sit down and fight. And so
Absolutely.
if a student ever comes home with like bruises or anything like that, always immediately ask for camera footage, so you can actually, certain classrooms are eligible to have cameras in the classroom that parents can then get that footage. So then you can monitor and see what's going on. That's not for every classroom, but there are instances where that's allowed. And the parent can request that. But if there's ever instances like that, or if, for instance, if we're dealing with behavioral issues, I actually deal with that a lot. Stephanie mentioned the MDR, the Manifestation Determination Review. So the instance is, well, schools are allowed to expel their students, right? But if they break a school law, but schools as arms of the government are not allowed to discriminate against a person with disabilities. That is what we've set up those structures to protect that class of people. So then you have to determine, okay, the example I always love using is if a student has dyslexia and, has an IEP for those needs, and then they spray paint the lockers. Well, there's not really a causal connection between, the student's dyslexia and spray painting lockers. They're expelled. I'm sorry, that sucks. We can work on maybe, if there are other behaviors, we can try and figure that out. But the school didn't infringe your rights there. Now, for instance, if a student has autism or Asperger's or, any sort of, Tourette's or anything like that, where they're acting out and they do have these behaviors, and then they get into a fight or they say something that the school considers is inappropriate. And so then they suspend. If it's over 10 days, that 10-day mark that comes in, the school is required to host a manifestation determination review, which is, okay, did the behavior that led to the consequence and the discipline, was that arising out of the student's disability? In which case, the school's not allowed to file that disciplinary action against you. And so, those are always hard to win. I've had some good ones, I've had some bad ones. But oftentimes if a student gets back, in their school, there is that, practical point too that I try to advise my clients of is like, okay, you just fought this hard fight against the school. Now you're sending your kid back to that very same school, and so you're going to be like, what does the day after the fight look like? Because the school year is still going strong. We're wrapping up, but you're still going to be there, and you might be there next year. So it is always important to try and build those good relationships with the school, simply from a practical point that you're going to be dealing with them every day.
Long time. Great advice. Thank you so much. I love how you kind of tied that all up. And of course, it's probably never a good day when things get to where we need lawyer protection, but we're certainly grateful that you are there and you understand the rights. And, by the time you get to that point, parents really are generally fighting for what their kids need and have their best interest in heart. So thank you for all that you do.
And I'll say this, I mean, I have two kids, both got into some situations. For my daughter, I was like, no, put her in in-school suspension. She deserves it. That's the right thing to do. She needs to be there. Now for my son, that just wouldn't have mattered. So, I think as a parent, in this collaboration between schools and families, you also have to realize if your kid was doing something that was just dumb and didn't have anything to do with their disability, they should get the consequences that are needed, and they learn from it. I will tell you that.
Mhm. That's a perfect segue. Okay, Miss Nia, flip to the next slide. And Stephanie, you are back on. We are talking about inclusive planning here, assessing and addressing. You're too far down. Go back up one, please. Assessing and addressing the needs of students with disabilities in an inclusive classroom. So I love what you just said, Mary Jane. It's like, how do the kids learn from each other, right? Stephanie, you're a master at this. I have seen you talk through this with numerous kids about how do we create inclusion and make those accommodations and modifications in the class so everybody can feel like they have a safe place. And then somebody here, maybe it'll be in the end, touch upon what kids learn from their peers, right? And what I always think is a great example is sometimes feedback might be embarrassing. There's bullying, but there's also embarrassing feedback. And I think sometimes, in inclusive classrooms, that's part of life. So go ahead, Stephanie. Nia, can you go back one? Can you go back a slide? There we go. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So I think the best inclusive evidence of a great inclusive classroom is when you don't know that it's an inclusion classroom, right? So what that means is you don't have the kiddo sitting at the special desk in the back of the room where that one paraprofessional, the extra teacher comes in and just works with this particular group of students. Or I think my training goes with the teachers when I talk to them about, you have to be very aware of what you're saying, what you're doing, all of that. Because we hear a lot of, when the paraprofessionals come in, your kiddo, take your students, or they would say your kiddos are ready to go take your test. Or, if you're in a situation where you have an inclusive classroom, where you have students in there with a 504 plan and an IEP plan, first things first, don't broadcast it to the whole classroom. Not only are you violating on their rights as a person, maybe they don't want their disability known. And I'll say it as a parent, like I was a big one on advocating, and my son's in high school now, and pushing him to advocate. And he turned to me and said, Mom, I don't really feel comfortable letting everybody know what's going on with me in it. And I think it's twofold. So as a teacher, you got to be careful what you say and what you're putting out. And the best way to know what's appropriate is if you can meet with that individual. Teachers, who's on your roster for 504, who's on your roster for IEP. Talk to your students if you can. And it doesn't need to be broadcast in front of the whole classroom. It can just be a private conversation. Hey, I need to see you after school. Come by really quick. I'm gonna write you a pass. I just have a couple questions for you. If you do this with all your kids, no one's really gonna know. So I would say include them in the classroom as you do any other student. And Mary brought up a good point too, holding our students accountable. If you know that they're capable of doing it, have them do it. Don't say, oh, well, they've got an accommodation for this, or, oh, this kiddo's autistic. I don't know if this gonna, let them try it. They might actually enjoy the activity. I think if you're noticing that they're having distress, if you're noticing that things are not effective, it's not the opportunity to call them out on it, embarrass in front of the class. It's important to either have a private conversation with that student. Second, reach out to their case manager or whoever supports the student on the other side and talk to them about what your concerns are. And I've always had teachers, fortunately at my end, ask me, what can I do differently? Or, hey, I'm struggling with this accommodation. How do I implement it in the classroom? So reaching out to those supports, and always too, reaching out to the parent. I've noticed a lot of times when students have a plan, especially an IEP, the parents feel like they don't need to contact the parent. Oh, well, they have a case manager, so they're going to hear from them. But then on the parent side, it's like, well, I never hear from the general ed teacher. So again, it goes back to that mindset of treating all your students as all of your students. If you're reaching out to parents to let them know who you are, or, hey, this is how I communicate with parents, make sure you get to your kiddos who have IEPs too, and 504 plans. And then just model that good, nice behavior for a lot of your kids. And the last piece I'll say about that is there was always this common statement that special education teachers would have. And we would say accommodations are just really good teaching strategies.
Oh, right.
So if you look at it like that, a kid might need a different placement. Doesn't need to have preferential seating on their plan for you to initiate, hey, this kiddo works better in this particular area of the classroom. So I think just taking that initiative to do what's best for your students, start there. That usually helps.
Well, that's when our students are so blessed to have wonderful teachers like you in their classroom.
Mhm.
So, Mary Jane, follow that up with how can we teach the other kids in the classroom about disabilities? How do you're such a wonderful community advocate, and I see you do this naturally all over town. Teach us kind of where do you get your wisdom from to make that happen?
I think as a parent, we've got to have high expectations for our kids to make sure that and believe that they can do it and be in the classroom. And I really appreciate Stephanie talking about how teachers can, it's just simple accommodations. As a parent, I know that accommodation checklist in the IEP doesn't mean anything. So I often would go in before school started and or just email the teacher and say, hey, do you know what this means? And they would say, no, I have no clue. And I'd say, well, just give me a worksheet and I will show you how to accommodate it and make an accommodation. And I would just come back with a whole bunch of work that they had given me and show, and they'd be like, oh, is that all it is? I mean, sometimes the accommodations are just so simple. Simple teaching strategies, that's all it is. You know, larger font, you know, he had a circle instead of right answers. It was just simple things. So I think as a parent, it's really important to, you know, those teachers get the IEP, but oftentimes, you know, nobody explains what's involved, especially in the general ed classroom. I will say this, as far as placement goes, and that's what we're talking about here, inclusive classrooms, this is the last part of the IEP process. I saw a question in here from a family talking about, you know, they want to move my child to a segregated life skills placement out of the general ed setting. And really, your child should only be pulled if the disability is so severe that they can't get any educational benefit without supplementary aids and services, you know, with supplementary aids and services rather, meaning you should be able to provide all those supports and accommodations and everything, reduced levels of learning, and still be included in the classroom. And there's just ways to go about doing it. Here's just one thing about parent-teacher communication. I just dealt with a parent and she was insisting that our child be included. And I kept saying, for what? What class do you want them included? What is it? And all she could do is recite the alphabet soup stuff. And she didn't know, and she didn't understand her rights. So it's really important as a parent, if you want your child included, know sort of how to make that work. How are we going to work on this? How are we going to, and work with your teachers to figure this out. Making these decisions in the IEP committee at the last, you know, it's just not the time. Let's think about that ahead of time. And I always like to tell families to say, what will that take? And be able to answer that question. What will it take to have my child included in the regular ed classroom? What will it take for them to have, you know, speech in the classroom, if that's where it's going to, what will it take is a better question than how come or why, or, you know, I demand this. What will it take? And that's really all I'm going to talk about. And I think the other thing is the kids in the general ed classroom are going to be parents someday of kids with disabilities, probably. I didn't know I was going to be a parent of a child with a disability, and I ended up with two. So it's really important that they see kids in the classroom, you know, doing things. I know that the teachers that had my kids in the classroom, especially for my son, they got the other kids involved. The kids knew how to provide, you know, they would show him a card because we were doing a lot of picture exchange communication at the time. They knew what things worked. When my son went to junior high and junior high took everything away, it was the kids talking to the parents who would call me and say they're not doing the right thing by Christopher, because they knew they knew what he needed. So, yeah, it's, in the world of work, we're going to be out working with other people that don't have disabilities. And so as a person with a disability, it's so important to be involved in a classroom and learn how to work with others, and have others learn how to work with you. These kids are going to be employers someday too. So that's my soapbox on inclusion.
Love it.
I'll stop there.
All right.
And
well,
I'm gonna have to leave in about 10 minutes because
Yeah,
I've got to go
I
pick up
know.
my.
We're gonna let you go. It's perfect. So Alex is gonna wrap this up for us with, okay, we heard about those ideals and when it works, but Alex, just give us real quick, how does the universal design for learning come into this? And again, with your lawyer hat on, these are great teachers and great strategies, but what does that approach enable you to do and enable the schools to do?
Yeah, so inclusivity is always important. I think it is something that even when I was growing up in school, we didn't always have, right? Like I always knew, okay, there was like the short bus, or like the class where the people, people who were different were there, but then like I was able to work with Best Buddies. I worked with Special Olympics, so I learned that through those pathways. But in the school, it really has changed. I mean, so the IDEA, the last time that it was updated by Congress with a major revision was in 2004. That was when President George W. Bush passed No Child Left Behind, and so that gave some major revisions to how special education law works federally. But there's been a push throughout America, just not just through the legal sphere, but also through great advocacy to have inclusivity. And so the legal requirement is that a school can't put a student in, they are required to put them in the least restrictive placement. And so that is you'll hear that like Mary Jane was saying at the end of the IEP meeting. So the whole IEP meeting is, what services do we need? What goals can we attribute? In the short blurb about goals, I always say if a dead man can do that goal, which is like, don't speak up in class, it's not a good goal. Try and do something that is tailored to your student. And if anyone can achieve that, it's not a good goal. But so that's all the hashing out discussion that you do at the beginning. And then you start talking about placement. Okay, well, all these things that we agreed upon, where do we do them? Do we do them in the general education placement, or do we do them in a more specialized placement? And the committee will give a recommendation. And as they're reading that out, I do recommend that you listen to what they are saying, and it'll be in that IEP packet. They talk about the tension there between making the student feel left out or othered, but also giving them the support they need. And I think that's always a really important tension to recognize. And if the art committee is ignoring that, then I want you guys to focus on that. But then also it's important for parents to understand, because that is, their requirement to put them in the placement that will give them the most support they need, but also will be inclusive. And so there's always an inherent tension there, but I think, schools have gotten much better, as we've gone on in making sure that we have, like this is saying, the universal design for learning. And so those are some of the pathways to getting a more inclusive environment.
Y'all are so awesome. And we are at the end of our presentation. I'm going to give you all a chance just to give your highlight, main idea takeaway. And I just want to say, I think, this idea of inclusion is so nice. Having worked in schools and as a mama bear and a parent advocate, I have met some of the most amazing children through my special education son's classroom. Keep the faith. These girls and boys, young ladies and young women, they have gone on to be teachers or to specialize as speech path or BCBAs. They have started clubs, they have started nonprofits, and they never would have done that and found that calling had they not had the opportunity to interact with our kids. So keep the faith, and you meet some of those good ones out there. We're thankful for that. Okay, Mary Jane's got to run to go get her son, so we're going to wrap this up. Parting thoughts, Mary Jane. What's your main takeaway you can leave with our nice group today?
I think that the big takeaway I would just recommend is work together. It's really important to be collaborative in this. It's not us and them. We're working together for the benefit of our child and making sure our child gets an education and they can be employed or live independently or go on to post-secondary education. I mean, that's the big goal of IDEA, is to prepare them for all that. So, work collaboratively with that. I know that schools are strapped for funding and they just can't do everything. So I think as a parent, it's really important to think about the 3 to 5 big things that you need to have happen over the next year. What are the big goals we need to, what would look differently at the end of the year if we got the right goals in place and we all worked on the right thing, and work on these goals at home. It's really important as a parent to work on things at home. It's not just the school can't do it all. You as a parent have to take some of that responsibility and work on things at home. I know it's not easy. Our kids are not easy, but when you do that when they're younger, it makes it so much easier for when they're older. And believe me, it was not easy when my kids were young to do inclusion, to come home. They, sometimes my son didn't have homework. I was still making him work on reading and math because I knew that I had to support what was going on in the classroom. And just be collaborative. It really is the big thing. We've got to work together. Those are the big things I guess I could say as a takeaway.
Thank you so much. We're going to let Mary Jane pop off to go get her son, and just thank you. As y'all can tell, she's an amazing mother, an amazing advocate, and she runs an amazing organization in town. I know she'd be more than happy. She and her team be more than happy to help anybody here who is listening with questions today. So thank you, Mary Jane.
Wait, really quick, really quick before you go. There's a person that's got their hand up in the chat, and I'd hate to have that person if the question is for you.
Okay.
So if it's related to you. So Marla, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question really fast?
It's not related to her.
Okay, it's not related to you. Okay, so Mary Jane, you're good to go.
Okay.
Thanks, Mary Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you. And thanks for putting this on for everyone today, and for putting it out online so that more people could view it. So thanks. Y'all have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Jane. All right, Marla, since your hand is up, who do you need to speak to? We'll make sure we get you in as we hear final takeaways from
Alex.
Okay, you're on the spot.
Okay, I actually have a couple of questions. I'm curious as to whether you as advisors are located in the state of Texas. Okay.
Yeah, I am. So I mean, I was born and raised in Sugar Land. Went to U of H for undergrad and South Texas College of Law for
so you're familiar with how Texas runs things.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm licensed in Texas.
All right. So I had a son many years ago who I had to constantly advocate and fight for him to get the services he was supposed to have. And I was always very successful. I am hearing, I'm not going to tell you the school district, I am hearing a lot of teachers who are currently teaching, and they're being told by the district, do not advise parents that their children possibly have learning disabilities unless it is obvious. I mean, you can't deny a sight impaired or hearing impaired or a wheelchair student, but when it comes to learning disabilities that are academic, the teachers are actually told, do not say anything to the parents. And a lot of parents in the schools that are having poorer students in them, those parents don't know to ask. And I'm wanting to know why the schools can get away with that and actually giving that instruction to their teachers, and what can be done about it.
So I do not represent school districts, so I will not speak for them or excuse them. I encourage you to reach out to us, especially if encourage those teachers to reach out to us as well. If they'll be whistleblowers for us, because we do. So Disability Rights Texas is a legal aid clinic, but it's also By law, we are a protection and advocacy organization. So each state is required by law to have one organization for people with disabilities. And so, Disability Rights Texas, not every state follows that same nomenclature of disability rights so-and-so. For instance, we used to be called Advocacy Incorporated. But there is, one for each state. So that gives us some oversight as well over the schools. So actually last week I was monitoring a school district where we'll go in with that, P&A authority, and we will go in and evaluate the school and make sure that they are following those things. So please reach out to us so that way we can do some more investigation.
Yeah, a good example is in the day my son was in school and you were handed a booklet with your parents' rights. There used to be a list of agencies that you could turn to when you had problems. The district has removed all of that years ago. And is that a requirement?
So to give rights, I mean, off the top of my head, I don't know of a requirement to let you know where to find help. They're supposed to tell you that you are.
State and federal agencies used to be listed in the book so that if you were having problems, you could reach out to somebody beyond the school district. And that's all been removed.
Yeah, so they are entitled to tell you, or required to tell you, that you can reach out for counsel or an advocate to come into our meetings with you. And so we mentioned those procedural safeguards. The way that they get around it, like the practical way to follow the letter of the law but not the spirit of the law, is they post those procedural safeguards online. And so, everyone has access to it. It's online. It's on our website. Check it out. So that is a way that schools will do that. They'll post it online. But the school should be telling you that yes, you are allowed to have counsel. For instance, if you say I'd like to bring my lawyer into this ARD meeting and they say no, that is denying you that right. So definitely let us know. I mean, always you're welcome to file an intake with Disability Rights or reach out to us, and so that way we can investigate further.
I want to thank you for being here today. You've given a lot of very important information, and now I know how to advise people who ask me because I've gone through the whole process, and because it's so long, I don't know that I'm actually giving out the correct information. So I found your whole presentation today was very helpful.
Miss Marla, can I just throw a tidbit in there? Haven't been in the education side. I'll tell you why they don't tell you is because a lot of times if the school makes a suggestion as the parent, so for instance, if I'm the teacher and I tell you, hey, that your child would really benefit from having some speech services, then you as a parent can turn around and say, well, Dr. Rodriguez from your school said that my child will benefit from speech services. So you could challenge the school then to provide those services. So that's why a lot of times special ed teachers, they are very, very careful with what they say, because the parents can challenge them to either provide those services or hold them accountable to what they're saying. So for the parents that come to you, it's been mentioned here already, document everything. I always tell my parents, even if this teacher calls you and says, hey, we're having this trouble with Johnny and this is going on. I know they have a behavior plan, but whatever the conversation is, as a parent, you can always follow it up with, thank you, Miss So-and-so, for calling me today. I just want to make sure I captured our conversation and document it in an email. Have the documentation there, because a teacher can tell you one thing in passing.
I'm actually was addressing the issue about classroom teachers. They know that the student is struggling to learn whether they are disabled in math or in reading. They just don't say anything because they're instructed not to say anything, because then they evaluate and provide services.
That's right.
That should be illegal, because a lot of parents don't know. I didn't know you had to make it, and I had forgotten you had to make the request in writing. But and it's coming back to me. But the fact that a teacher would know this child isn't processing correctly, and they don't point out to the parent, your child will benefit if you ask for him to be evaluated, that's just wrong.
I think sometimes on behalf of some of the teachers, I think when they're hired and they're in these classrooms that don't have an equal amount of teachers per students and they're overwhelmed, sometimes they can't. I would imagine as a teacher, it would be hard for me to even make a recommendation for one particular student because I've got so many other kids in my classroom already, and there's so much stuff that I need to cover before I need to get all of them out and go to the next group of kids that I got to teach. It's almost impossible now for teaching because they're so overwhelmed. There's so many kids in each individual classroom now that to be able to do that. And then at sometimes also I did want to ask, and Ms. Marla, I'm sorry for cutting you off. I did not mean to do that. Go ahead and finish before I
Okay,
ask my question.
because I went through this such a long time ago, that's what happened. My son's third grade teacher actually pointed out to me that he really should be evaluated because he was so bright, but he was struggling to learn. And it turned out that he was dyslexic. And for a teacher not to be able to say, you know, when you're filling out report cards and you know you have a bright student and they are not keeping up with everybody, something is amiss.
Yeah, to that point, we can definitely talk a lot about what things should be like, but always the consideration that we have too is whenever we do take a case, and if we take it up to say it gets appealed up to the Fifth Circuit, and we think that that law will then be evaluated unfavorably, we always have to determine, is it worth the risk of taking this case too and setting a bad precedent? Because the legal system, you have to follow precedent, Supreme Court, and then you have your federal appellate cases and your district courts too. And so we've had situations where you have to be careful about the precedent that you set as well. I will say though that from the parent side, you do have these rights still in place, and so I would recommend reaching out to all these organizations and to us as well to see if it would be a good fit for a TEA complaint for a child funding violation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I just wanted to offer something in there too, and not making excuses for teachers or anything. And it does seem like anybody who recognizes that there might be an issue ought to speak up when they can. I'm going to come back to the value of community in this and say that, that is why I believe it's really important to have the kids involved in whatever it is, sports or music or some type of an extracurricular, and moms groups, like support groups, because oftentimes those other supports and resources don't feel bound or have these, worries about obligations. If they say something, if they don't say something, are they going to get in trouble or lose their job? And they're going to say, because that happened to me several times, is people in peripherally related organizations said, hey, I've noticed this with your child, or you can really see them as compared to their peers. So that would be just one takeaway to all the mama bears out there, is network through the social medias, through the moms groups, just sitting there at swim meets or whatever it might be. There's a lot of those types of insights that might validate your concerns that you need some further testing, or then you go to the schools and say, hey, I really want this evaluation to happen.
And the Papa Bears.
And the Papa Bears. Yeah, absolutely. Don't forget all the bears, all the parent bears out there.
As a matter of fact, a Papa Bear put a question here in
Yeah.
the chat. It says, what factors should parents consider before deciding whether to send their fifth grader with IEP to a public school with district resources or private school with limited capacity to assist, but will at least follow the spirit of the IEP and provide the best and provide as best as possible? It seems I'm losing my chat here.
So Jack,
Okay.
is that your question? I think coming back to private, the high cost of private with a smaller environment, lower student to teacher ratio, or staying in the public schools where these rights are, what do you say, legally afforded to you, but hard to get and often hard times to navigate. So yes, versus the lower
Yes.
cost of public. You know, I don't know, our two experts, y'all chime in on that. I mean, Dr. Stephanie, you've seen both sides of this. You know, there's just pros and cons. My personal feeling on that is we ended up doing a hybrid of education. My son went to a small private school for a couple of years during middle school, and then he was able to go back into public school. So, you know, I'm always of the feeling that, again, as parents, you're your best child's advocates, and you know, there are often supports out there too. There might be scholarships that you don't know about until you ask, or some of these schools, there might be other resources that you don't know about, to scholarships or supports or something. So I would say investigate everything and then trust your gut and make the best decision for your child based on what you know, because it might change again in a couple of years. It's not a forever decision. So I'll turn
Or
it
if
back
one thing
over.
doesn't work, then switch it and go to something else.
Mhm.
You figure out what works. Yeah. Okay, thanks. So getting back to my other question that I had, what happens what does a parent do when you're in a situation, because I've seen this a couple of different ways, where you've got a child that's been labeled with a behavior issue as opposed to it being something else? Because a lot of times when that there's something else going on, where there's special accommodations that are needed or some kind of special needs that's needed, a teacher would automatically assume, or the counselors would then automatically assume, oh, it's just a child with a behavior problem and it's nothing else from that. Where does a parent go from there when they know
Dr. Stephanie can answer that one.
I think it really goes down to your evaluation process too, because I mean, yes, the behavior, because with behavior, it's so outward a lot of times. So either the kiddo might be physically aggressive, verbally aggressive, defiant, they shut down. Like, so those behaviors are more observable. So a lot of times, yes, those they get called out first. Like, and until you, like you mentioned, it might be something else. The way to dig deeper is going to be through all those pieces of like an evaluation, because as a parent, if there's a suspected disability, so in that case, maybe the parent's saying, hey, I know my child does have some behavior stuff, but I really think it's because they're having trouble with reading, or they really math. I noticed in math class, I'm always getting called from the math teacher. Something's going on in math. So when it comes to an evaluation, if they're going to be either looking at special education, or maybe they're already in special education and you know what, something's going on, I'm not sure about this, they can ask for an evaluation. And a lot of times they will ask like a referral question, what are we looking for? Because as the evaluator too, they need to know like, what type of evaluation am I doing? How in depth? Is it a comprehensive? Am I just doing some observations here? So it's going to really be based on what comes out of the evaluation. And as always, a parent can challenge that too. They can ask questions about the conditions of the evaluations, what type of testing they use. And a lot of parents don't always know that, which is why it's important for the evaluator. And most schools do this, but if they don't, the parent should be asking for that evaluator to review the report with them, and they're supposed to answer every question the parent has, whether it be by section or for the whole report or whatever's put in the recommendations. So I would say going that route. If a parent suspected something else, ask to be tested. If they're tested and the parent doesn't agree, they can always ask for an IEE, which is the evaluation to be done outside of the school setting from an evaluator that's not doesn't work for the school.
Yeah.
Alex, you want to back that up?
The only thing I'll add to that, I mean, Dr. Stephanie really hit the nail on the head. The only thing I'll add is make sure to do that request in writing. So that way you do follow the law there, and that you have that protection. But yeah, definitely if a student is exhibiting behaviors, there may be something more there. And so an evaluation is always helpful. I always tell parents, so you have to give consent to evaluate. So the school will give a form to the parent asking for consent to evaluate. And then you can also consent to special education services. Those are two separate processes, two separate asking for consent. So oftentimes, if I'm working with a client with a student who's currently in general education, but may need to be in special education services, I tell them, it might not hurt to just do the evaluation. It's up to them, but you can consent to do the evaluation, get some really good data about your child, about how they do in class, what they think, what their, personality is like, even sometimes, their behaviors, some really good data, empirical data about your child. And then if you decide afterwards that you don't consent to special education services, if they are eligible, that's your prerogative as well, but the evaluation, it's something that, on the school's dime could help you too, so there is that two-step process of asking for consent for the evaluation and then asking for consent for the actual education services.
Let me ask this question. So if somebody doesn't agree with the diagnosis and decide, no, okay, no, my child doesn't need this kind of service, or I don't, they don't want it. And then later on, if they decide, okay, then maybe there was something there. Do they have to go through that process again, or is it already kind of put on file that this was already what the diagnosis was before?
So I was hoping to get through this without saying the two words that every attorney hates saying, is it depends. It really does depend on the situation. Some schools may say, okay, well, we'll have to do a reevaluation. It depends on the timing as well. If the evaluation is still current, or if you're evaluating for different things, you may have to do a new evaluation at that time. If it's close enough where it's just like, I've had clients revoke consent and then 2 days later change their mind. We just, sometimes we re-sign the form, sometimes we just say reinstate the consent form and we just move along, and we just continue on. So unfortunately, yeah, it would depend on the situation.
Okay.
I'm going to ask kind of the flip side of that question. What happens if a parent asks for an evaluation or diagnostics and it comes back, your child doesn't have a disability, or the school doesn't think that the disability is significant enough to warrant services in the classroom? How do you disagree with that when as a mama or a papa bear that something ain't right, as we say? How do you go about fighting a denial for services?
So there is an appeals process, but I would specifically look to making sure that the evaluation is done by more than one test, so it's not just an IQ test and then we're done. There should be multiple evaluators, multiple tests being done, and multiple settings. Oftentimes you may have a school just on a Saturday bring everyone in and do evaluations. Then that's not always the best indicator, because one, it's on a Saturday, so not a weekday that your child is used to going to school, so they may act differently. Two, it's in a different setting with a bunch of people that they're not familiar with, not in the classroom where their IEP would actually be used. So I would encourage then, to see, and you can see those things ahead of time as well. Like Dr. Stephanie recommended, always asking for a draft. That's important. And so, if you get the evaluation back and it doesn't have those things in there, I would ask for another one with those things. And request another evaluation be done with multiple settings and with multiple evaluators.
Good points. Dr. Stephanie, I'm sure you've seen this 100 times when parents don't agree with what comes back. What are your words of wisdom?
Yeah, definitely taking time to read the evaluation, getting with the evaluator and asking those questions ahead of time, because there's nothing worse than going into an IEP meeting and saying you disagree and you're at the meeting. And then at that point, it's like you're going to, the delay in the process or opportunity for, for the student to get their services starts to happen. So I think that as Alex mentioned, going through the process, those procedural safeguards are going to be really helpful. That booklet that they offer, and I've seen parents decline it. Sometimes they offer it every time you're at a meeting. Take them. They're online. You can check TEA too if you're in Texas, if you need it there. Getting an understanding of what that appeal process looks like. And typically, if you're going to go the IEE route, the district can give you a list of different providers or that you can choose from. I was told recently, I'm not sure if this is true, you don't always have to use those providers. if you disagree, and that it would still be paid for. But again, that part I'm not sure. That might be an Alex question. I'm not sure if they could just use their own evaluator if they disagree with what the school decides or determines based on evaluation. But yeah, as a parent, you have every right to disagree and make sure things are documented at all times. And so that way, if things do come up later, or I have seen things that the parent has mentioned and the school disagrees, and then later the school finds out, that really did happen. That's why that documentation is key, because as mentioned before, there can be a chance where they might owe comp services, or there may be something to where the student does deserve some additional services or time for time lost based on a decision that was made, that shouldn't have been made. So I think question everything, read everything. And the last thing I'll say about evaluations, almost every evaluation that I see has recommendations at the end. Do not negate those recommendations, because they, like Alex said, a lot of the times these evaluators are giving you really good info about your child, and they'll come up with recommendations. So whether or not they qualify for services, that's good information to have, because you could use it to help or rather it'll just give you more information of what's beneficial to your student, and it makes a difference.
Yeah, someone else.
Might be easy. Sorry, Dr. Giddens here was just putting in the chat that perhaps it's even something like the student and the teacher don't get along. That there's bad interaction there, and who knows what caused that. But yes, many reasons. So getting those evaluations and just figuring out what's going on. Thank you, Dr. Giddens.
So do they take that into account when they're making the evaluations and things that everybody has a different learning style and a different communication style? Like not everybody learns the same. And when you've got one teacher that's teaching to a group where the children don't all learn and receive information the same way, it's kind of hard for them to kind of retain it or comprehend it. I'm a classroom person, so I don't like doing online classes. I want to be in the room. I want to hear what other people have to say. You give me a book and put me online, I'm going to sleep. So my learning style has to be in person. I have to have that interaction and that engagement versus, somebody that may not. So is that taken into consideration? What exactly is this child's learning style or communication style?
It will be, or at least it should be, in the evaluation. But yeah, Dr. Stephanie, you can touch on that as well.
Yeah, it depends on what the evaluation's looking at. So if they're looking at like their academic abilities, then for sure they are going to be looking at what type of mode is best suitable for that child learner. And this is when differentiated instruction comes into play too. I think it goes, while we're talking a lot about special education, as I mentioned earlier, it goes on beyond that to where your curriculum and instruction people on campus need to be aware of these pieces, because they can teach teachers how to just provide differentiated instruction, or how, maybe a child might be better given an oral response versus a written response based on an evaluation that they had. So a lot of times it's in the accommodations, a lot of times it's not. So that's why it's really important for the parent and then I would say even case managers, because those recommendations that come out will say, as you mentioned, Ms. Neal, like what the child is the better situation for them to optimize their learning. And then those recommendations can be passed on to the teacher. It can be provided through a training, case manager saying, hey, let me review these for you to show you how to break these down in the classroom. So yes, depending on the type of evaluation, they're going to show how that child is best fit to learn.
Yeah.
Ms. Nia, we are almost out of time. If there's any urgent pressing questions, we'll do our best. And if not, Dr. Stephanie and Alex, we're going to ask y'all to give us just your last bit of takeaway advice and your favorite thing that we can leave here having learned today. Nia, are we good?
There was one question that was emailed to me, and I don't know if this is more of a comment versus a question. Let's see, the school provided the client provided my client with forms to sign acknowledging that their child was autistic. Those forms will allow the child to get therapy and diagnosed as autistic. He would have to go to another school. So if the parent doesn't sign the forms to go to another school, does that mean the child will not receive the therapy?
They want her to make that determination by email, or
It was
I would-
forms that they had given the child, saying that the child had already been diagnosed as autistic, but the child would have to go to another school to receive the therapy. And I assume that it's not in conjunction with, and the person that asked the question actually left already.
that
The therapy is not available at the
Mm.
current school.
Yeah,
If they don't
that's
sign
okay.
the form.
It sounds like it's just like a, outside
programming
thing.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if they don't sign the forms, does that mean the child does not get therapy?
Yeah, I would need more information, but based on what you're saying, that's still an ARD committee decision, because the ARD committee, it's based on their LRE. So if school A is saying, we acknowledge that your child has this situation, we acknowledge that this is what they need, however, we don't have it, but school B has it, then the ARD committee still has to be involved, because then there's a measure of like transportation that is going to be afforded as a right to that child. So where the parent, whether, and this does happen often, especially when it comes to specialized programs, they're not, a lot of times they're district programs, they're not school programs. So the district will then place them at different campuses. So if that's the case, again, it is still an ARD committee decision, because they have to make sure that all of that's documented in the child's plan. So that way, they'll be probably considered a transfer student. So I would definitely, just based on that information, making sure that the parent, that it's through the ARD committee and she's not just signing documentations on her own, and emailing back.
Okay.
Would be my suggestion.
All right, let's go ahead with your takeaways and the final, then I'll wrap up and we can wrap up.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Okay, my takeaway is, if as much as possible, include your child in the process. I think so many times there's so many adults having conversations, we forgot about the child. And if I know when they're smaller, it's us, it's the parent, the mamas and the papa bears, as we've been saying, or the guardians that are really advocating for their child, and they want to make sure that their rights are being afforded to them. So, but I would say, as your child, as much as possible, right? Because we know they may have a certain disability or a reason why they can't, but there's always a way to get their piece through communication. There's a way for everything. And so I'm a big component of getting the child voice. I don't take on any advocate parents until I meet the child, because for me, if I'm going to sit at the table, I want to make sure that I'm advocating for the most important person in the room, and that is the student. So my takeaway is, as a parent, I think a lot of times we think our kids need all these things, and we forget that they're the ones that are sitting in the classroom, and they're the ones that the teachers are coming to them saying, well, I got to follow. This is part of the plan. I've got to make sure that you have this, and the kid might not even want it or might not be a benefit. So always get their input, make sure it's something that they're comfortable with and that actually works. And if it's something that your child's saying, mom or dad or guardian, I don't need this, and I can do some trial and error stuff. You can always take data on trial and errors. There's nothing wrong with that. But make sure their voice is heard, so that way that the plan that's being made for them aligns with what they envision for themselves.
Great advice. Alex, wrap us up.
The takeaway that I would give is get informed. It is alphabet soup, and it is very difficult to piece together what goes where. But we've mentioned a few times, we do live in an internet age. Even now, if you go on Bing and you type in a question, ChatGPT pops up and explains it to you, and you can have a conversation. And I won't say to the accuracy of ChatGPT or to any website, I can say to the accuracy of our own website, Disability Rights Texas, we do have resources on there. So if you go to drtx.org, if you go to the education tab specifically, we have a lot of resources there, including, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, we have a manual called the IDEA manual, and I use it every day. It's just like my cheat sheet for explaining, what the laws are, but also practically what should happen, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So that is a really good place. Like I said, the procedural safeguards, if you get those, it's a boring read, but it's an important read. So definitely read there. And if you have any questions or, would like case services, we encourage you to file an intake with us.
Thank you so much. Okay, Ms. Nia, back to you.
All right. thank y'all so much for taking the time out this afternoon. I was sitting here trying to make sure I'm going through the Facebook to make sure I don't have any other questions or comments here that anybody wanted to add. But you guys have done an awesome job. Thank you so much. And even if your child is not a child that has special needs or a disability, I think some of this information also applies to them as well. Communicate, ask questions, talk to your kid, talk to the counselors, talk to the school, do your research, join different groups, find out what resources and things that are out there and what's available to you, because you never know. Just being quiet doesn't get you the solutions or get you the answers it is that you all may need. Talk to somebody, ask a question. So thank y'all again so much. The contact information, the links to to the panel's various websites will be included in the link that in the email that I sent out to you guys. I will be including the recording along with the chart that Dr. Stephanie has went over with you guys. If there's anything else that you guys may need, please feel free to reach out to myself and I'll direct the question, or reach out to the panel directly for more information, for more resources for you guys. Following this presentation, on the screen, there will be a Zoom link, a link that pops up asking for your evaluation of today's presentation. Hopefully the information that you all received here today you did find to be beneficial, and then we do ask that you pay it forward and pass it along, share it with other people that also may find the information to be beneficial. If there are any other presentations, like Rachel mentioned earlier, that a month of service does not currently offer that you all may be interested in, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Rachel so that we can discuss and try to figure out how we can get it on the schedule for you all. So without the constant feedback from the community, we don't know what it is that you want to hear or what you need to hear. So with that being said, Wendy Dawson, Dr. Stephanie Rodriguez, Alex, thank you all very much. Mary Jane, thank you very much for you all taking the time out this afternoon and volunteering your time. We appreciate you guys so much. You all have a wonderful remainder of your afternoon. Rachel, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap up also? And you're on mute.
Okay. No, just what a wonderful presentation. I'm so glad that we were able to touch on this topic, because I know I have, special needs in my family. So I'm just glad that we were able to diversify, our workshops. So I'm appreciative
Absolutely.
to the partners for wanting to do this, because it's so needed. But as far as the Department of Neighborhoods, we will have our coffee and conversation scheduled for April the 23rd, from 10 to 12 at our Sunnyside Multi-Service Center. The Department of Neighborhoods, the several divisions within our department will be putting on presentations as far as what programs and policies and procedures that we have currently that, have been changing with the new administration. So you are more than welcome to come out to either in person or virtually to attend that meeting. So.
Okay. And coming up later on this week, actually tomorrow at 1 p.m., we have the Harris Central Appraisal District, one of the other month of service partners, that's going to be presenting on personal property tax for business owners, as well as kind of part 2 of our asset protection series, which is inherited property, including clearance title and other probate concerns, which will be on Thursday at 1 p.m. So we look forward to seeing you all there. Again, thank you all very much. You have a wonderful remainder of your afternoon, and thank you all for continuing to support and attend the A Month of Service presentations. You all have a wonderful remainder of your afternoon, and take care of yourselves.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you for having
All
me.
great.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.